I thought my wife and brother hated each other until I found out they were secretly plotting to steal my house and my life. But they forgot one thing. I always thought my wife, Laura, and my younger brother, Eric, despised each other. From the moment they met, there was nothing but hostility between them. Laura would roll her eyes whenever Eric walked into the room, making snide remarks about his freeloading habits, his inability to hold a stable job, or the way he always seemed to need a favor. Eric, on the other hand, would call her a manipulative control freak, accusing her of turning me against my own family. It was exhausting to be caught in the middle of their never-ending war. As much as I loved Laura, Eric was my brother. He had been struggling ever since our parents passed away, and while I agreed that he needed to take responsibility for his life, I couldn't just abandon him. Laura hated that I let Eric stay in our guest house for free. She'd remind me every chance she got that he wasn't contributing, that he was taking advantage of my kindness. I'd noticed money missing from my wallet. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I spent more than I thought. Maybe I left it somewhere. But it kept happening. Then, little amounts started vanishing from my bank account. Just $50 here, $100 there. Amounts that could be easily overlooked. But I hadn't withdrawn them. Laura began spending more time out, coming home late with vague excuses. Just out with the girls, she'd say, yet I'd never see texts or calls from any friends. Eric, who had always been careless with money, suddenly seemed more interested in my financial situation. He'd casually ask about my investments, my accounts. At the time, I thought he was just trying to learn, maybe get his life together. Now, if he finds out anything before the paperwork goes through, we're screwed. I know, Eric murmured back. But what if he catches on? You know how he is. There was a pause. He trusts me, Laura finally said. He'd never suspect me. And he thinks you, and I can't even be in the same room together. That's our advantage. I felt my breath hitch in my throat. My mind raced, trying to process what I had just heard. Paperwork? What paperwork? What were they planning? And why the hell was my wife talking to my brother like they were co-conspirators? My heart pounded against my ribs as I carefully peeked around the corner. There they were, standing in the dim light of the kitchen, their faces tense, focused. The way they looked at each other wasn't filled with hatred at all. In fact, it was something else entirely. Something I couldn't quite name yet. I quickly stepped back before they could see me. My blood ran cold, but I forced myself to stay calm. If they were hiding something, I needed to find out what it was. And if I played my cards right, they'd never know I was onto them. The next morning, I acted like nothing had changed. Over breakfast, I kissed Laura on the cheek, asked her about her plans for the day, and even cracked a joke about how she and Eric had managed to be in the same room without killing each other. She laughed, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, like she was testing me, waiting for me to react. I didn't. Instead, I decided to do some digging. That afternoon, while Laura was out and Eric was in town, I went into the guest house. Eric rarely locked his doors. He never had anything valuable to protect. But this time, I noticed something different. His laptop, usually left open and covered in junk food wrappers, was closed and locked. His desk was unusually neat. Something was off. I checked his drawers. Bills, receipts, nothing out of the ordinary. Then, I found a folder tucked away beneath a stack of old magazines. Inside, my worst fears were confirmed. Legal documents, transfer of ownership forms, a power of attorney request, and at the very bottom, a forged signature. I stood there, staring at the papers, my hands trembling. They weren't just stealing money. They were trying to steal everything. The plan was clear now. They were going to make it look like I was losing control, maybe even unfit to handle my own affairs. Once that was in place, they'd take control of my accounts, my house, my assets. And then, they'd get rid of me. A cold rage settled inside me. I had been blind. I had trusted them. But they had made one crucial mistake. They thought I was weak. They thought I was naive. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They were wrong. Very wrong. That night, I sat at the dinner table with them, forcing a smile, pretending I didn't know. But as they laughed and talked, their eyes flickering with unspoken secrets, I made a silent promise to myself. I wouldn't just stop them. I would destroy them. I sat at the dinner table, my fingers curled around the edge of my plate, forcing myself to smile as Laura and Eric talked. Every laugh they shared, every casual remark, every sideways glance between them was a reminder of how blind I had been. The anger inside me was a steady burn, but I kept my face neutral. If they thought I was clueless, I would let them keep thinking that for now. After dinner, Laura kissed me on the cheek as she stood up to clear the table. "Babe, I'm going out with the girls tonight," she said, running a hand through my hair. "Don't wait up, okay?" I nodded. "Of course. Have fun." Eric stretched his arms and yawned. "I'm heading out too. Got some things to take care of," he said. Avoiding my gaze, they were both leaving at the same time. That wasn't a coincidence. The moment I heard their cars pull out of the driveway, I sprang into action. I had already seen the legal documents hidden in Eric's guest house, but I needed more proof, something concrete, something undeniable. And I knew exactly where to look. I went to my home office, where I kept my personal files, banking records, and important documents. It was locked, as always, but I had the only key. Or at least, that's what I thought. Sliding the key into the lock. Everything looked the same at first: my desk, my bookshelves, the cabinet where I kept my most important documents. But then I noticed something. The chair was slightly pulled out, just an inch or two. But I never left it like that. My desk lamp had been switched off, even though I always left it on its dimmest setting. And worst of all, my filing cabinet was unlocked. I rushed toward it. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. I hadn't checked my accounts in detail for weeks, trusting that everything was secure. But now, as I scrolled through my transactions, my hands shook with rage. There were multiple withdrawals I hadn't authorized. Transfers to an unknown account. Small at first, $100 here, $200 there, but then growing larger. $5,000. $10,000. $20,000. I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding in my ears. They were bleeding me dry, and I hadn't even noticed. I needed proof. I grabbed a spare security camera I had stored in my closet, one I had never installed but kept just in case. Working quickly, I set it up in the corner of my office, positioning it so it had a clear view of my desk and filing cabinet. Then I did the same in the living room, the kitchen, even outside near the front door. If Laura and Eric were sneaking around, I was going to catch them, and then I was going to make them pay. By the time Laura came home, I was in bed, pretending to be asleep. I heard her moving around quietly, slipping out of her dress, climbing into bed beside me. Her scent, vanilla and something floral, filled my nose. But instead of comforting me, it made my stomach turn. How many times had I fallen asleep next to this woman, thinking she loved me? How many times had she whispered, "I love you," while secretly plotting to ruin me? I kept my breathing steady, my body still. She had no idea I was on to her, and that gave me the advantage. The next morning, I checked the footage from my security cameras. The office one hadn't caught anything yet, but the front door camera had recorded something interesting. At 12:47 a.m., Laura returned home alone. At 12:55 a.m., Eric's car pulled into the driveway. And at 1:03 a.m., Eric let himself into the guest house, carrying a folder of papers. The same folder I had seen hidden under his magazines. My stomach twisted with rage, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed more than this. I needed undeniable proof. I started watching them more closely after that. I acted normal, pretending nothing was wrong, but every time Laura went out, I took notes. Every time Eric left, I checked the cameras. Then, 2 nights later, I hit the jackpot. Laura had gone to bed early, or so I thought. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps downstairs. I slipped out of bed and crept toward the hallway, my heart pounding. The office light was on. I moved silently, pressing my back against the wall, listening, shuffling papers. A quiet curse. The sound of drawers being opened. I peeked around the corner and my breath caught in my throat. Laura, standing at my desk, rifling through my documents. I wanted to burst in, to grab her by the wrist and demand an explanation. But I didn't. I stepped back, retreated to the shadows, and let her think she had won. The next morning, I checked the security footage. There she was, sneaking into my office at 1:08 a.m., opening my cabinet, flipping through my papers. And the worst part? She wasn't even being careful anymore. She thought she had already won. But she had underestimated me. That afternoon, I went to my lawyer. I had always trusted Laura with everything: my finances, my home, my future. But now, I had to protect myself. I changed my will. If anything happened to me, she and Eric would get nothing. I transferred my most valuable assets into an account she couldn't touch. I contacted my bank and flagged the suspicious transactions. And I started putting a plan in motion, one that would make sure they paid for what they had done. When I got home, Laura was waiting for me at the kitchen table. "Hey, babe," she said sweetly. "Where have you been all day?" I smiled, setting my keys down. "Just running some errands." Her eyes flickered, studying me. "Everything okay?" "Of course," I said. "Why wouldn't it be?" She gave me a long look, as if trying to read my mind. I just smiled. She had no idea that I was already 2 steps ahead of her. And soon, she was going to find out the hard way. The hardest part of revenge isn't the planning, it's the patience. I had to keep smiling, keep pretending. Every time Laura kissed me, every time Eric acted like the lazy, reckless brother I had always known, I had to remind myself, they think they've won. Let them believe it. But I wasn't going to let them win. I had already taken the first steps, securing my assets, changing my will, flagging the suspicious transactions. But I needed more. I needed them to make the final move, the one that would expose everything. So, I started laying my own traps. Over the next few days, I began acting more stressed about money. I left my bank statements out in the open, muttering under my breath about how things were getting tight. I even staged a fake phone call with my bank, loudly discussing how I might have to sell the house if things didn't improve soon. I made sure Laura overheard every word, running a hand down my face like I was overwhelmed. "It's just finances," I admitted, my voice heavy. "I don't want to worry you, but things aren't looking great. I've made a few bad investments. I might have to move some things around." She stiffened just slightly, just enough for me to notice. "What kind of things?" she asked carefully. I smiled inwardly. "Gotcha. Oh, nothing serious," I said, shrugging. "Just considering liquidating some assets. Maybe even putting the house on the market." Her grip on my arm tightened. "Mark, this house means everything to us." Us. Eric was with her. I watched on the hidden camera as they rifled through my documents, whispering urgently. "We have to do this soon," Eric hissed. "If he sells the house, we lose everything." "I know," Laura snapped, flipping through my bank statements. "He's getting paranoid. He changed some of the accounts already. If we wait too long, he might move everything." I felt a cold satisfaction watching them panic. Eric rubbed his face, pacing the room. "So what's the plan? Do we go through with it now?" Laura hesitated. Then, finally, she nodded. "We do it tomorrow." Tomorrow. That was all I needed. The next morning, I went about my day as usual, pretending I had no idea what was coming. I made breakfast, kissed Laura goodbye, even waved at Eric when I saw him in the driveway. Then, I called my lawyer and the authorities. By the time Laura and Eric were ready to make their move, my trap was already set. That night, I pretended to go to bed early. Laura kissed me, whispered an "I love you," and left the room. She thought I was asleep. I wasn't. I watched from the shadows as she quietly made her way downstairs. Moments later, Eric slipped into the house through the back door. I already knew what they were about to do. They had been forging my signature for weeks, transferring small amounts from my accounts. But tonight was different. Tonight, they were going for everything. I crept downstairs, silent as a ghost. I watched from the doorway as Eric pulled out a set of documents. Laura signed them, her hand steady. "This is it," she murmured. "Once this goes through, the house is ours. He won't even see it coming." Eric smirked. "And once we get the rest of his money, he'll have nothing." I stepped forward. "Wow," I said, my voice calm. "This is fascinating. Please, keep going." The color drained from Laura's face as she spun around. Eric dropped the pen. Mark," Laura stammered, eyes wide. What are you doing up?" I held up my phone. "Recording," I said. "Oh, and I sent everything to my lawyer about 20 minutes ago. You know, just in case you thought I was bluffing." Laura opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Eric took a step back. "Listen, man." "No," I said, my voice ice cold. "You listen." I took a slow step forward, letting them feel the weight of what was about to happen. "I know everything. The stolen money, the forged documents, the plan to make me look incompetent so you could take over my assets. I know everything." Laura swallowed hard. "Mark, please, I can explain." I let out a humorless laugh. "You can explain? You mean, explain why my own wife and my own brother have been conspiring to ruin me?" Eric held up his hands. "Look, man, it wasn't like that, eh?" "Oh, it was exactly like that," I snapped. "And guess what? The bank already flagged the fraudulent transactions. And those documents you just signed? They're now evidence of criminal intent. Laura's breath hitched. You wouldn't. I already did. Right on cue. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the windows. Laura gasped. Eric whipped around toward the door. The sound of approaching footsteps filled the air. I crossed my arms. Oh. And did I mention? You used my home office for all of this. Which means I caught everything on camera. Laura looked like she was about to faint. Eric bolted for the back door. Big mistake. 2 officers stepped inside, blocking his path. Eric Dawson, one of them said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. You're under arrest for financial fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Eric tried to argue, but within seconds, he was restrained. Laura stumbled backward, tears streaming down her face. Mark, please, you can't do this to me. I just looked at her. I didn't do this to you, Laura, I said softly. You did it to yourself. The officers turned to her. Laura Dawson, you are also under arrest for financial fraud and conspiracy. As they cuffed her hands behind her back, she sobbed. I stepped aside, watching as the 2 people who had betrayed me were dragged out of my house, the house they had tried to steal. As the last police car disappeared down the street, I exhaled. It was over. I had won. And as I turned back toward my home, I realized something. Betrayal is a game. But in the end, the smarter player always wins. The house was quiet again. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt like I could breathe. No more secrets. No more deception. No more waking up next to a woman who had spent every night plotting my downfall. Laura and Eric were gone, and they weren't coming back. But my revenge wasn't over yet. They had spent months, maybe even years, trying to destroy me. I wasn't going to just sit back and let them face a few legal consequences. No. I was going to make sure their lives burned to the ground the same way they had tried to burn mine. I had played the fool long enough. Now it was time for me to make sure they felt the consequences. The morning after their arrests, I met with my lawyer. You did well, he said, scanning the case files. The evidence is airtight. Between the security footage, the financial records. She might get a reduced sentence. I chuckled, shaking my head. Oh, she won't. I had made sure of that. Before leaving the police station last night, I had one last conversation with Laura. She had been crying, her face pale and desperate, as they put her in the holding cell. Mark, please, she had begged. Don't let them do this to me. I had crouched down, looking her right in the eye. I didn't do this to you, Laura, I had whispered. You did. And then, just to twist the knife, I had left her with one final thought. Eric was locked up in a cell right next to hers. It was only a matter of time before he realized what she had done. And when he did, whatever trust they had left would be gone. They had turned on me. Now, they would turn on each other. With them out of the way, I turned my attention to the next phase of my revenge, destroying their reputations. Laura had spent years cultivating her perfect image, a loving wife, a charming woman, a respected figure in our community. That image was about to crumble. I made sure of it. I leaked everything. The security footage of her forging my signature, screenshots of her text conversations with Eric, the financial records showing how she had been stealing from me. And then, just to make things worse, I sent it all to the people she cared about most. Her boss, her coworkers, her friends, her family. Within hours, her entire world collapsed. Her job fired her immediately. Her friends, people who had once idolized her, cut her off completely. Even her own parents publicly disowned her, releasing a statement saying they had no knowledge of her actions and wanted nothing to do with her. She had lost everything. Eric's downfall was even more satisfying. He had always been a leech, always finding a way to mooch off someone else. But now, he had no one left to mooch off. When he got out of prison, if he got out, he would be broke, unemployed, and completely alone. I made sure of that too. I contacted every business in town, warning them about his history of fraud. I reached out to his old friends, letting them know exactly what he had done. Even his ex-girlfriends, women he had cheated on, manipulated, and abandoned, got the full story. By the time I was done, no one would give him a second chance. No money, no job, no friends, no way out. He had stabbed me in the back. Now, he would spend the rest of his life paying for it. 1 month later, I stood in front of my house, the house they had tried to steal. Except, it wasn't my house anymore. I had sold it. for double the price it was worth. Laura and Eric had spent so much time trying to take it from me, but in the end, they got nothing. I took one last look at the front porch, then got into my car. As I drove away, I felt lighter than I had in years. No more lies. No more betrayal. No more them. For the first time in a long time, I was free. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Laura. She was in prison, and she was begging me to help her. "Mark, please," she had written. "I made a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. I love you. You're my husband. Please, help me get out of here." I read it twice. Then I laughed. She still thought she could manipulate me. I picked up a pen, flipped the letter over, and wrote 2 words. "Never again." Then, I tossed it in the trash. As I walked away, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace. I had one. And for once, I was finally free. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking Reddit cheating stories happening around you.